The tensions and opportunities in healthcare and sciences investing for place-based economic development. We'll talk about that today on Builders Live. Hey, I'm Chris Wink, the co-founder and CEO of Technically, the news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. Sciences and healthcare and a whole world of regulated industries have different time scales and capital requirements than the software investing that many of us became familiar with over the last 20 years. I'm fascinated by the role place-based economic development has in and around the sciences and healthcare. And so to get smart on that, I am joined by Kathie Jordan. She's the managing director for healthcare investment group at Ben Franklin Technology Partners in southeastern Pennsylvania. We know them well. I rely on them a bunch. Kathie, thanks for being here.
It's great to be here, Chris. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. All right, Kathie. So I know the Ben system as a leader, but there are versions of this kind of work around the country that I find interesting. I'm sitting in Baltimore right now. We work closely with Tedco in Maryland, another example. There's others that we'll get to, but I am interested in this model we have that you guys represent well, which is an economic development responsibility, a place-based economic development charter alongside an investment portfolio. And everything we know about modern investing requires a kind of diversity of different bets to fit together to outperform returns, but you also have a kind of economic development responsibility. So I'm hoping to use the next 15 minutes of our time to learn a little bit more about how you weigh that in healthcare. So could you start for me with kind of laying the foundation? When you look at your portfolio, specifically in healthcare, or maybe the wider Ben system, if that's better, talk to me about weighing the different kinds of businesses in healthcare and sciences. Because I know biotech looks really different than digital health, looks really different than medical devices, and they must operate differently. So talk to me a bit about how you view this at a high level.
Yeah, so first I'll just start, right? Ben has over 180 companies in our portfolio between the tech and the healthcare investing groups.
That's statewide, or that's the southeastern Pennsylvania?
That's just southeast, right?
Yep.
You're right, Chris. So just in our 5-county region, we have touched an awful lot of the early stage companies here in our region. So we are quite broad in terms of what the investment thesis is. I'll talk just about the healthcare group. We have about 70 companies in the healthcare group, and we really are healthcare and life sciences, right? So when we think about our investment thesis, we first think about really that blend of economic development, right? Jobs, wages, tax growth here in southeastern Pennsylvania, alongside of returns. The returns are really important because Ben's been around for over 40 years. And while we are incredibly grateful to the state for their continued support over those 40 years, we also do invest the returns that come back to us, right? So we invest off of our balance sheet and to really try to grow that pot of the amount of money that we have here that we can return that capital back into the region. I make that distinction, right, that we're, some people sort of say, oh, well, are you just a grant? And we're not just a grant. We couldn't do what we do if we just gave the money away as a grant. We really are dependent on those returns and on that blended investment thesis for what we look at. So along those lines, then when we think about our portfolio of over 70 companies in the healthcare and life sciences, we really take a blend across that portfolio because we're geographically narrow and then quite wide, right? We look at the biotech portfolio. Those are the ones that we know if they're successful, they're going to be some super outsized returns. But also if they fail, they're going to have to raise a few million. They might raise 10 or 20 or $100 million to get to failure as well, right? So high risk, high reward. But if we are likely to see a 20x return in our portfolio, it would likely come from those traditional biotech investments. And we're certainly excited to be investors in Lattice Bio. They just announced that their IND got cleared through the FDA yesterday. Super excited to have invested in MVAX, which also had a press release yesterday about their phase 2B results in a clinical trial for glioblastoma. And we love that, right? Like, it's amazing to see what you can do when you're curing childhood orphan diseases or cancer. By the same token, though, we like to balance that with different buckets of risk. and different ways to think about the story of what Ben does. In our medical device portfolio, those take far less money typically to get commercial. In this day and age, you can often get medical device companies all the way to commercial with really what Ben and angel investors can put together. And that's a great story for us. They also have some great stories around local area manufacturing. And so I've recently talked with the CEOs of both Sale Fusion and Solution Medical, and they are doing some of their manufacturing here in Pennsylvania, right? And that's fantastic, even though the people doing the manufacturing don't work for those companies necessarily. They still work for other companies, right? Contracting manufacturers that are here in the region. And we love being able to see how that really supports the overall mission of what the work is that Ben does. The medical device portfolio also, right, like those returns tend to come in a little faster. They clear the FDA more quickly than a biotech company would. So they really provide, in many ways, we think of them as either we sort of say smaller money in, but smaller money out on a shorter time frame, or we might say they provide those singles and doubles in our portfolio. And then we also manage, in my group, what we call our digital health portfolio. That's in part because I have people in my group who have experience in the healthcare setting, both pharmacy and in respiratory therapy. So really understand those clinical workflows of what we do. And those companies will invest very early revenue, right? If they've converted like just one pilot into a paid customer, right? So we're really there at the very earliest stages of what they're doing, but they tend to exit a little bit more quickly, right? They don't have to clear the FDA. They get to revenue more quickly. Some of them, we often invest on a convertible note. Some of those companies realize that maybe they're not scaling quite as quickly and they might opt to pay back the convertible note, but that's also helpful to us because it recycles the capital in a little bit faster time scale in terms of then being able to turn that capital around and reinvest in other companies that are getting started here in the region.
So a bunch of things there. I want to. So the relationship to life sciences and healthcare is interesting. So let me terraform myself by showing you a Venn diagram we use internally at Technically, and you can tell me why I'm a fool. But this sometimes is something I've used to like wrap my own head around how, put simply, we're going to piece these things together, because the scale is really different. This oversimplified Venn diagram does not reflect healthcare is gargantuan size, right? Like healthcare is a giant industry, and life sciences is pretty narrow. But when I was like first talking to other people as they were trying to like guide our coverage of how these terms got used, biotech, health tech, when they intersected medical devices, I was trying to like get a rule of thumb. And this is what we pulled from a few interviews of how you put healthcare and life sciences together, how you put technology and life sciences. So maybe you don't have to like totally rip me apart, because of course this is at a simple level. But like, before I go to my next question, do you like follow the journalist level of depth that we're doing with this, and how dumb do I look to you with this oversimplification?
Well, I kind of like it. Whenever you see things where you're simplifying, for me, it also opens up the questions of like, what do you like and what do you not like? And then why, right?
Yeah.
And where would you sort of push back? But it also can kind of, asking those questions helps change your thinking or sharpen your thinking, right? I think it is, for me, it's interesting I tend to put biotech and pharma sort of together, right? Like biotech's just it's early and then it becomes pharma when it's later and bigger. But I like the putting together pharma in between life sciences and healthcare, because it's true, even though pharma does some early stage, what they're really good at is delivering their product within the healthcare system, right? Like when we think about it, and that is part of the reason that a lot of there are people who are like really drawn to biotech, and then they'll sort of say to me, yeah, I love biotech, but once the product actually finishes the phase 3 trial and it's on the market, right? But they're like, I kind of lose interest because basically the commercial side takes over, right? So in a way, I sort of love your diagram because it really shows what are the key strengths when we think, sort of oversimplified again, when we sort of think of the key strengths of these different areas and then how they fit together. So I kind of like the way I like the way you've put that. And then, we also do see, right, technology we get a lot of questions like, how are you seeing AI in your portfolio? And the truth matter is we're seeing a lot of companies that are an existing company or that have something they're doing and they're just incorporating AI, right? So like, so I love the way you put the tech in there, because of course that's what we see is that the tech piece of that is becoming part of companies that already existed. They had a solution and then they start saying, well, let's just try to incorporate AI because we need to. It's a tool and it should be there. And so, yeah, so I kind of like your diagram.
All right, good. And again, believe me, I wasn't looking for your, like, I knew it wouldn't be perfect, but it has helped me, and I think probably the Technically Newsroom a bit, like wrap our hands around how these things interplay. And just, I want to ask a question on that, but what you just said shows up a bunch in our reporting that, like, when you describe any kind of platform technology, like what we call artificial intelligence, big, set of tools, universe of stuff, it can feel like, the internet, insofar that you wouldn't say, oh, I'm a business that uses email, because you're like, well, y'all do. Like, that's not really the definition. It's a tool that makes working easier, but it's going to show up in lots of ways. And it feels like some of machine learning and some of like that'll show up in all industries. And we're interested in how much is, like, what does it mean to be an AI company? In the same way, how much does it mean to be an internet company? We went through phases, and that kind of graduated over time when you decide what is a differentiation versus like table stakes. Like these are just tools we're all commonly using. But let me let me push this forward. So I'm sitting in Forum MLK right now in Baltimore. We technically are hosting an event tonight with the University of Maryland Biopark, and they're great, place-based university, a lot of advanced research here. I am really interested in how we do place-based economic development alongside the sciences, because as you hit on it, the sciences mean a lot of things. The deeper I go in my journalism career, it's sometimes hard for me to wrap my hands around it, especially when I think about economic development, because the number of workers is going to range a lot if you're using, depending on the industry. So maybe talk to me a little bit when you're sitting with a policymaker or whatever, and they're trying to wrap their head around, well, how many workers are we talking about at these companies in my district? That must have some tension for you with, the breakthrough sciences. That might be like, well, this is going to be a distributed team, or the science is going to be done different ways, because that's how science is done. How do you weigh the economic development priority around taxes and jobs with the I'm meant to invest in the best companies and how the sciences get advanced the best? How does that show up in your thinking, your strategy, or the I guess the strategies is the right way to ask it.
Yeah. So that's where I rate. The medical device portfolio tends to be that they're the kind of the bigger winners faster, right? If you are building a medical device, you actually have to have people who are in like a clean room building it, right?
Yep.
And so I kind of love those companies, right? Like they employ engineers and technicians to actually build a product that's physical. The product has to get shipped, right? And those are really great, especially because when they're first getting started, they're usually doing a lot of the work here. So they have to have people who
actually, just Kathie, just to be super literal, if you have a portfolio company that comes to mind that could be that example, give it to me. But I'm just trying to be really literal. So I have an example, whatever. Tonight I'm going to be interviewing the founder of NASA Clip. Just got a $250K seed round from TEDCO in Maryland to be a Ben Franklin peer. It's essentially, she's going to correct me, but it's a small intervention to support bloody noses. Very specific small intervention, and it's a small, simple medical device. Lower regulatory hurdle, and it was medical doctor spotting a small gap and filling that market niche with a product. Initially, in my mind, like I've for 20 years reported on, that is you have to build a prototype. You have to test. You have to go through customer feedback that would be familiar to any technology or software investor. It's similar. I have to prototype, test. Is this going to solve a market niche? That's kind of what you mean. Initially, you are a bunch of people in a room building prototype, building first units, getting it out there. At some point, you go to scale, and that might be manufactured somewhere else. But that's kind of your point, right? Initially, you are people in a room figuring out if this is a need.
And some of our companies, right, they really do manage to build a lot in-house, right? So when I think about AvaMed, which is developing buttons and anchors for rotator cuff repair, they have actually built out their manufacturing lines in their facility and a clean room. And I love that story, right? Because they employ people right there, right? We're seeing the same thing with Excision Medical, right? They are really building out their manufacturing. And when I go see those companies in person, they have people who are employed who are like they work here, right? Many of them are engineers and technicians. On the same side, right, we have sort of two different issues with the other parts of our portfolio. So the biotech companies oftentimes remain highly virtual or outsource a lot of their work for a lot longer, right? And so they will depend a lot more on contract research, sponsored research agreements back to the university that originated the technology, right? So they take a little longer to grow. That said, when they hit clinical, they tend to grow up to 10 to 15 employees. Once they start dosing patients, they need more people working for them. So they do grow, just not quite as quickly as early as the medical device portfolio. The flip side, the digital health companies, and this is a challenge across any of our sort of more tech-driven portfolio, right? They can employ people anywhere. They don't need 5 people in one room, one place to build something, right? They can have 5 people all over the globe to build something.
Right.
And so with those companies, right, we really do focus, kind of saying, okay, we encourage them to really build the workforce here. We certainly have amazing universities. We love to be able to see students coming out of our universities with those technical computer science degrees, right? That there is a growing number of startups where they can have jobs and they can actually work here, right? We also do see increasingly companies who are choosing to bring the labor, oftentimes it's ex-US, back to the United States, just because it's easier for them to manage their workforce. And whenever we can, we really encourage them to grow their workforce here in southeastern Pennsylvania. But I think you really pointed out too how we naturally think about the balance across our portfolio, that we want these companies to grow. We want them to grow in the best way possible while still growing here in southeastern Pennsylvania, and really trying to crack that nut, right? Remote work, but I'm not saying anything new about remote work and how you manage a remote workforce and then how that drives economic development. It is something that we think about though when we manage our whole portfolio.
Well, and I'm going to lose you in a sec, but maybe that is a good place for us to scratch, because there was a shift, even though we didn't end up in the fully remote landscape that perhaps people are projecting in spring 2021. We did have a tripling of American hours done remotely. In some industries, it hovers around 40 to 50%, mostly around technology is one of the categories that are highest. Maybe 40% of work hours are now done remotely in that field. So it was a giant change. So we did factually experience a giant change. It was tripling of hours in a relatively brief period of time. That is, by our human standards, a pretty dramatic change and pretty narrow. And that seems where we're roughly settling in most of the surveying I'm seeing. That seems to be roughly the settling. Different. I toured a building with a lot of lab space that people have to go into. This stuff well, but have you seen in your time that shift of what remote work did for any of the trades you're in? And maybe the example I'm maybe thinking of, that team now, the founder is in our jurisdiction of southeastern Pennsylvania, but the rest of the staff is elsewhere, or the co-founder is in Virginia. Have you seen more of that happen, and have you had to update your own thinking or the strategy, or was that always there? Tell me a little bit about that as a kind of final point of balancing economic development and returns.
Yeah, I mean, we do see companies where we've invested and then things change with the company, right?
Sure.
And people move, right? And we manage that per the guidelines that we have. What we really do look for, we typically now say we like to see the CEO of the company in the region.
Mm-hmm.
most of the time the CEO is less likely to move out of the region. Whereas if we see people who just work for the company, right? I mean, they might come, they might go, they might move personally, they might no longer work for that company, right? So that's one of the things that has, I don't know that that's changed so much in our thinking, but I would say we're also a little bit stricter about it than we might have been in the past, just because we're really trying to de-risk that the company would move out of the region within 5 years of our investment, right? We really do want to be able to say that we're investing in companies that really are reliably going to stay here and build companies and build products right here in southeastern Pennsylvania. So that's one thing we really look for, is kind of where is the CEO, and then what are their plans to grow that company. We start with a lot of companies, especially on the tech side, where like they don't necessarily need office space. They've just got 3 people who live in their region who are kind of working from home, so they maybe have a business address. But we really encourage them also, as they start to grow, to look at the incubator facilities and space in the area and make those connections, right? And really build them out as a force within our region. And we've got 5 counties, so they're not necessarily all in Philly either, right? They can be in lots of incubator space, and in many of the office parks that are in the outlying counties further out in Montgomery and Buckchester, Delaware counties. So that's really how we think about it, right? And with a focus on the companies doing what's right for them at that time.
Sure. I've now gone over and I have to let you go. So maybe send me off with, like, in what you're seeing, any trends you're most interested in, any projections out of what you think might be more interesting to us in a couple years. Give me anything that you're seeing now that I can check in with you in a couple years and say, how did that go?
Trends. I see. So I'll put in a little plug for anybody who's listening. We've had some nice exits, and we're seeing some nice exits on the horizon in our digital health portfolio, which kind of ties into what we're seeing. I'd love to hear from anybody who's listening to this. If you have a digital health type of solution, we would love to talk to you here at Ben. And that really ties into the next things that we're seeing, right? We obviously see lots of cell and gene therapy because we're here in southeastern Pennsylvania. So we're a nexus of that. But other things that I'm seeing, right? People really starting to think very seriously about elder care, dementia care platforms. We recently invested in Wovenly. I had coffee with an entrepreneur who's thinking of another sort of solution in that space. And I think as we see a growing and aging population in the United States, those are going to be, right, and alongside a declining population in people who are of the age where they can do caretaking work. I do think those are going to start to be some solutions where we need to be looking for game-changing solutions in that space, right? And that could be any number of things in terms of how we think about caring for an increasingly elderly population.
That is quite important and well said. Kathie, thank you. Sorry for going a bit long, but thanks for informing me on the topic at hand. Appreciate it. Kathie Jordan, she is the managing director of the Healthcare Investment Group at Ben Franklin Technology Partners. Thanks, Kathie.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
See you next time.